Welcome to Talking Industrial Automation, a podcast where you get to know the people who make modern industrial automation possible. You will get to hear from CSIA system integrators and industry partners to get a better understanding of how they help their clients solve process challenges and how they've earned success in their careers. Along the way, we will touch on system integration best practices, technology, trends, and challenges. Whether you are a manufacturer, end user, supplier, or system integrator, you will enjoy the insights these industry professionals bring to this podcast. Let's get started. Hi, my name is Lisa Richter, the host of Talking Industrial Automation, a podcast where you get to know the people who make modern industrial automation and processing possible. In today's episode, we're talking industrial automation with Steve Pavlosky, who is Principal Product Manager of Historian and Data at the Edge Technology for GE Digital. With more than 30 years serving in automation and industrial data management, Steve is an industrial internet pioneer and firm believer in the value and power of data. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Lisa. It's great to be with you and your audience.
Awesome. So let's get started. How do you describe to lay people what you do?
Well, I often talk about the sort of two aspects. Number one, really, what is industrial automation, right? And I help them understand that, what industrial automation does is we help our users help their factories run better, right? And whether that be through software or I spent many years in the controls business within GE, right? It was all about making equipment run better, more reliably, and more productivity. And when I think about what I do, it's really all about two pieces. It's listening to customers to understand what their challenges are, what their problems are, synthesizing that input with what I think industry trends are, maybe what I see competitors doing, and then really creating a vision for our development team so they understand where I want to take the product. And more importantly, they really understand the problems that we're going to solve on behalf of customers. And when I can make that linkage, then I'm successful.
Do you or GE specialize in any industry, product, or discipline?
Wow. So if I think about GE Digital, right, we are really all about creating value from data across a wide variety of industries. So I work in the manufacturing segment. So we focus on consumer packaged goods, food and beverage, water, wastewater, automotive, pharmaceutical and life sciences type customers. We have other parts of our business that are focused on power generation, oil and gas, upstream, downstream, midstream, and analytics around those assets, and then grid. Many of the same power customers that use our software to manage the generation of power also use our software to keep the power flowing, through their networks to their customers. And so, we're really focused on sort of that entire spectrum of industrial use cases.
So you've been in automation for decades.
Yes.
Can you tell me some of the changes that you've seen related to industrial data management over the years?
Yeah. So, when I started in the mid 80s, right? So there's obviously been a tremendous amount of technology change. I won't spend a lot of time on that. I think most of your users get, how technology is changing and how rapidly it's changing today. But at the very beginning, right? I mean, PLCs and programmable controls for equipment were relatively new. HMI SCADA systems were brand new. I was there at GE's release of their first version of Simplicity in 1988, 1989 timeframe. So these are products that have lived for a long time in the market. But really, they were all about, even when you think about HMI SCADA, it's about how do we create context for the data that's coming from a machine so an operator can take action. And that basic concept still lives on today, right? We talk about asset models and we may use different language and we may use different technology, but it's really about enabling humans, by and large, to take advantage of technology so that they can make better decisions around their operations and to, again, drive uptime, productivity, reduce cost, improve quality, all of those kind of business challenges.
So what about more recently, like this past year and going forward into the next 12, 24 months? How has GE Digital grown and changed, and what do you expect coming up?
Yeah, so it's been an interesting period for GE Digital. I mean, GE Digital was formed not really that long ago in the scope of GE, right? GE's been around over 100 years. GE Digital is maybe 5 or 6 years old, right? Bringing together technologies from other parts of the business. And at the outset, GE Digital was really largely focused on the industrial internet, cloud-based technologies as sort of a platform player. And as I think about what's happened over the last year, 2 years to a year, we've really narrowed our focus to how do we enable customers to get value faster from technology by focusing on purpose-built applications, and as opposed to being a sort of core platform player. So that change has occurred. I don't see any change in that strategy. What we really are starting to think about is continuing down the path of not only making it easier to collect data and get context to the data that's being collected, but also analytics. And because a lot of our customers are asking about analytics, and we've had data scientists as part of our organization, and we build analytics for our own purpose-built use cases to help turbines run better, to help compressors run better, or to help the grid operate better, or help customers understand what are the the important inputs into a given process that impact the quality. What we're really trying to do is now better understand common use cases of data, common problems to solve, and sort of pre-packaging analytics so that, again, customers can get value faster from the technology.
Is that what you would, if I asked you the question, what's unique about how you approach industrial data management, would you kind of riff on that same theme, or would there be some other point you'd want to make?
So to me, it's related to that, right? My focus, you could focus on the technology. I focus on value creation, right? Ultimately, data management is there to serve the purpose of providing people with better information to make decisions. So that's really my focus, is how do we unlock the, and you'll see whether it be, some of the McKinsey studies or other folks where, maybe 1% of data that's being created by machines is actually generating value. And basically you can basically see a waste stream of how the value of data is wasted. And so that to me is the travesty. And so what I'm trying to do is enable our customers to get more value from that data that's going into the data dump, right? How do they turn more of that raw data into useful information, whether that be through context, whether that be through better visualization tools that put data in the hands of more people, or whether that be in analytics that sort of interprets the data and in a way that a human might not be able to do on their own.
Help me understand when it would make sense to use a historian solution versus, say, a relational database.
Sure. I mean, they both have their use. Historians are purpose-built to very efficiently store, retrieve, and distribute primarily time series data. There could be other data types. There could be alarm and event data. There could be binary object data. There can be textual data. But in general, it's sequenced over time, versus relational databases, which are really better at data sets where the data structure changes over time, and people need to be able to flexibly change sort of table layouts or build what they need. In the case of, say, time series data storage, what needs to be collected is known, right? It's the data value, at what time, what's the quality. So you can very efficiently store data, and while people will say, well, it's, hard disk space is not expensive anymore, I don't care about that. To me, it's really about the retrieval. If you can very efficiently store data and very efficiently retrieve it, you're not having people wait for that answer. And in addition to that, right, historians typically have other capabilities. They have built in, how am I going to get that OT data into the system reliably? What happens if a network connection occurs? Do I have to build? We've already built, and all of the players in the market have thought through store and forward type technologies and aggregation technologies. You want to be able to easily collect the average of a value over an hour. Well, that's built into a historian, versus a relational database itself doesn't have that. It's just a storage mechanism. Now, there are people that have built historian solutions on top of relational databases, and those have their place. I don't think that they are as scalable as purpose-built solutions. So, but they do have their place. So they're kind of a hybrid.
So you talk about analytics, and it really is just such a hot topic right now.
Yeah.
Describe the relationship between historians and analytics.
Sure. So if I think about analytics in the industrial use case, I really think of them in two different categories. And you'll hear vendors talk about streaming analytics, and that's kind of an analytic that's looking at the value as the value is generated, versus analytics that occur over time. And it's important to understand sort of what the value, what you're interested in is how that value is changing over time, for example. And so in the latter use case, a historian is often quite important, because I might want to understand, I'm going to run an analytic that requires the analysis of current value versus the value over an hour, over a day, over a week. And I also may want to, once I'm alerted by an analytic that there's a potential problem, I may want to then also be able to go back to the same process or the same piece of equipment and look at how that the data associated with that piece of equipment looked a year ago, or 18 months ago, or last week, right? And a historian facilitates all of that, that historical data retrieval, in a way that a streaming analytic wouldn't. It would just, the streaming analytics have their place, all right, but when we think about analytics that require time-based analysis, the two are very closely aligned.
So let's talk about the scary cloud. How does historian fit with cloud technologies and cloud strategies?
Yeah, so it actually in many ways ties back to the conversation around analytics. What we see today is there are lots of cloud-based data storage options, and there are some cloud-based time series data storage options. I won't per se call them historians, because often they don't provide a lot of the aggregation capabilities that a historian might. But they do, the cloud, there are lots of analytics that can be done at the cloud, and the cloud does have a level of scalability that enables collection of data over perhaps an entire enterprise. And so what we've actually done over the course of this year, while we had integration with the Predix cloud to enable our power and oil and gas and grid customers to collect data from their assets and push that data into Predix for our asset performance management solutions to use, which are designed for those use cases. What we've done is we've opened ourselves up to enabling customers, as part of our core product, to take and push data from a historian into Azure IoT Core or AWS. I guess it's Azure IoT Hub, AWS IoT Core, Google Cloud IoT Core, because the customers have said, look, we want to run this series of analytics. We want to use this analytical tool, and that happens to run in the cloud. And so what we see here is actually kind of the best of both worlds. The customers that keep high fidelity, high resolution data on premise for their operational needs, we enable them to take the right subset of data at the right aggregation layer level. Say maybe they need 1 second or 100 millisecond data stored on premise, but they need hourly average data in the cloud for their business level or enterprise level analytics, because really what they care about is comparing the daily performance of one plant to another. They don't need millisecond data or 100 millisecond data. So we give them that ability to live in both realms. Now, over time, will customers want to leverage cloud infrastructure to run historians? Sure, we're starting to talk to customers who are asking us about that. And there'll be some product changes that are required to take advantage of how cloud infrastructure works differently than on-prem infrastructure, especially when it comes to disks and disk I/O. They behave differently, and the cost is different. And so, we're partnering with some customers that are interested in moving that way, and so the product will, as we listen to customers' needs, right, the product will change. But it's not scary. It's really about what's the power of what new technology is out there, and how can we turn that to solve customer problems.
Yeah, I know you still see people a little skittish about it, though.
It's interesting. I've spent, as you said, now 34 years in this industry. It's really been since 2014. So about the last 6 years or so that I've spent straddling the edge in the cloud. And when I was first talking to customers about solutions that were hosted on their behalf back in 2014, there was a high percentage of customers sort of looking at me kind of sideways. It's like, that's really not going to work for us. And it's shifted, right? I mean, it's important to do it well. And I think that's kind of a benefit that GE brings to customers. Like, we monitor 3,000 gas turbines around the world at power plants. We know how to do data collection securely and bring that data up into cloud infrastructure and do fleet-wide analytics on that data. And we do that on behalf of our OEM business, the power generation business that builds those turbines and then sells service contracts to those customers. And that's the way we're able to deliver the uptime requirements in those service contracts, is through analytics. We can tell before there's a problem that there's going to be a problem, and then we can help that customer deal with that potential problem during an opportune time. So
let's talk a little bit more about what differentiates GE from the other competitors. So if I'm a prospective customer and I'm doing the research, what should I look at about GE versus competitors in the area of historians?
Sure. So I do think that there is this notion that we come from an industrial background versus a software only player. So I think that's one thing that customers ought to. There are good solutions that come from software only players, but I think I think that's one aspect of taking a look at GE. I think the real question, as customers are thinking about and they're researching technology to apply, is not to think about their problem today, but to think about their problem 3 years from now, right? Because they could be looking for, I've got an HMI SCADA system, I need to collect a small amount of data. Well, what might you want to be doing 3 years from now? What analytics? How might you want to tie that data together? How might you want to tie the data from this plant together with another plant? So I think there's really a notion of making sure that the technology platform aligns with sort of what you're using. So, for example, we have both Windows-based historian, because most customers in the industrial space, they're running Windows-based applications. But we actually have ported our historian to Linux. We have some customers that are Linux shops and they want to run on Linux. And so, so does the technology platform work? what's the sort of expertise, and how is the vendor, what's their longevity, right? Yeah, I mean, GE has been in this business since really the 70s, when we were doing numerical control, pre-processing, right, and then moved into control systems and HMI SCADA and MES and the like. So there's many different factors, but I think the key is, when making a buying decision, right, think about, how is the technology going to integrate? How does it fit their current sort of infrastructure requirements? And think about a solution not from the needs of today, but what the needs of 3 years from now or 2 years from now will be, so that they're making a decision on a platform or product that can scale to what they might need.
Okay, so without naming names, can you talk about some historian customers and how your software helped?
Yeah, absolutely. So for many of our customers, storing the data in Historian is really the lifeblood of their operation. So it could be specialty chemical companies that are producing, say, industrial gases at gas plants around the world that are located at customer sites. They monitor the health of that equipment through Historian infrastructure. They actually bill their customers based on the data that's being brought. To food and bev companies who have to have traceability of what's going on in their process, to as I did talk about before, GE's power business, where we're monitoring the fleet of turbines. They're just to one of the world's largest consumer packaged goods, where they track all of their material movements in Historian, so that because basically they're running analytics to understand how much floor space do they have for bringing inventory in and moving inventory out. And so they can't actually run their operation without Historian running. And so it's wherever data has value, Historian will play a role in securely and reliably collecting that data, and then providing that data to whoever's the consumer, whether that be a person or an application.
What kinds of trends and challenges are you seeing in edge computing?
Yeah, so edge computing first. There's lots of definitions, right? There's what we often think of as small footprint edge devices, that fit in the IoT world, where people are doing data collection off of machines and then sending that data either to the cloud or some application to, honestly, servers can be deployed as edge compute devices. I think there's so from a trend perspective, first of all, more and more compute capacity, more and more network capacity. And you think about what's 5G going to do in that space. I don't have the answer to that. I don't think anybody does, but I've certainly talked to customers who have been starting to look at how does 5G work. We recently talked to a customer in the metals industry, and they were trying to figure out, could 5G help them do mobile tablets and mobile communication within their plant, because traditional wireless technologies just wouldn't work because of the environment they were in. So there's lots of but I think actually that the challenge is really the pace of change. It's no different than your cell phone. Your cell phone's an edge computing device. You happens to have apps on it that are primarily used for enabling you to talk and then interface with other cloud-based data sources, right? Whether that be the weather, right? That's all coming from the cloud, right? Or your email server. And your phone devices, the phone devices have changed dramatically in sort of every year, their and network capacity. So it's really the pace of change, and then which really creates a problem for the industrial user and the management of devices, right? You think about, Windows laptops have existed, and yes, they get refreshed every 18 months, but IT can manage a fleet of Windows laptops because they're all basically the same in their behavior. They're all running the same operating system. They can deploy the system management tools to them, but the sort of variation and speed of change of edge devices, I think I think presents a big challenge to the end user community today, and to then the system integrators who are potentially recommending technology, right? So that's another place where you think about, I potentially want to be looking for technology that the vendor has a policy around long-term support, right? Because these devices, people buy machinery, they expect that machinery to last 15 years, 30 years in some cases. That isn't the case with, you buy a small footprint $300 edge device. Vendor could upgrade that next year and not really want to support that device. Well, that's problematic for industrial users. So picking a technology vendor that has a track record of long-term support, I think is super important, and specifically with respect to edge devices.
What are the opportunities for integrators and end customers in edge computing?
So to me, and we've talked about analytics before, I think that's really, it's this combination of edge devices that are connected to the machines, running, say, the streaming analytics to alert, that are close to the machine, so high speed analysis close to the machine, and then pushing that data either to a plant historian or to the cloud for longer term data storage and analytics. That, to me, there's still a very large opportunity there, right? There's been people in the last business I was in, I was responsible for GE's family of edge devices that were connected to the cloud, and that technology was still slowly getting adopted. And I think there still remains a very large opportunity for analytics at the machine on edge devices that are smart enough and have the communications capability to also send data, the right data, for data storage. So there are big opportunities there from an edge computing perspective to help those users get more productivity out of those machines.
In your opinion, what is the biggest challenge that integrators are facing today, and how is GE Digital helping?
So in a way, it's tied to what we just talked about. The pace of technology is as painful for integrators, perhaps more so than for the end users, right? Once the end user has made a decision, they've bought a set of technology. Okay, they get comfortable with it, and they can use it for some period of time. With the integrators, technology is always changing. So I think one of the things we're trying to do within GE Digital, first of all, is frequent communication with our integrator community, talking about sort of product changes, and relating to how those product changes and enhancements can help them solve additional problems for customers. Because it's technology for technology's sake has really no value. It's really about why are we creating technology, so that they understand as they talk to their customers, what problems are the customers describing that the new technology could potentially solve, and then be educated enough to both recognize that and to be able to implement efficiently, right? Because that's the other problem that integrators face is, time is money. They get somebody billed to a job. They want to be able to use, learning. I'll say it this way: learning is expensive for an integrator. So any hour spent reading a manual, watching YouTube videos, is time that's not being spent applied to a billable hour to a customer. And so, so that's another piece of where GE Digital, I think over time, perhaps didn't put enough focus on. And that's something that we're actually focused very heavily on today, which is how do we take our products and make them much faster and easier to deploy in a way that we hadn't really focused on perhaps a couple of years ago. And so that should then help integrators be more profitable, right? So they should be able to get more done in a day. And so that's another thing that we're focused on, is thinking about cost of deployment in addition to cost of long-term management, which is really the burden the end user plays, but cost of deployment, which is what the system integrator faces.
Overall, when you think about how GE Digital works with integrators and your most successful joint projects, what do you think the formula is for success?
I think it comes from the parties really understanding their role and adding value in the space that the other doesn't, right? So if I think about GE Digital, right, our focus is, we are a technology supplier. We're delivering a set of technologies based on a set of broad customer inputs, and then obviously support of the products. And yes, sure, sometimes in some cases we do some services work, but in general, not in the manufacturing space per se. Really, what we like to do is partner with system integrators that combine sort of a customer relationship and often long term, sort of having worked with a customer to really understand that customer's operation, so that they can. Customers often aren't able to accurately describe the problems the challenges that they're trying to solve. And the integrators, if they've been working with those clients for a long time, often can provide that translation role, and which helps them make a better decision on what technology to use. But at the same time, right, we have integrators. I'll give you an example. Integrators that have built practices around certain technology. So one of our partners has really embraced the notion of high performance HMI. And when I use those words, I don't mean really fast computers that the screen changes in a quarter of a second. I mean building HMI screens that are almost monochromatic. They have only the important data, and so when something important changes on a screen, it's obvious to the user, right? That's sort of the whole notion behind that ISA standard around high performance HMI. And yet, for 30 years, users have and system integrators have built more and more complex screens. We've all seen examples of that where someone drew the fanciest picture of a piece of equipment, and people oohed and ahed over it when it was first, but it's really just clutter. You can't really read the numbers. You can't, there's clutter on the screen. And so helping customers migrate from what they had, now really simplifying the screens in a way that delivers more value to the user, right? That's a real skill that this partner overlays on top of our systems. And so I think that's the other piece, is really they have to understand what they're good at, and both parties need to understand what they're good at and then leverage the skills of the other.
What makes GE Digital optimistic about the future of the automation industry?
Well, first of all, it's a long-standing, almost constant growth market. Good growth across sort of the entire, especially in the manufacturing space, whether it's MES, Historian, automation. They all sit in the sort of 5, 6, 7% CAGR market space. So it's a good, solid market. Industrial customers are always faced with new challenges. We think about COVID. COVID has really accelerated change this year. The people that used to be on the floor aren't necessarily on the floor anymore. And so, you talked before about customers being leery about cloud technology. COVID has actually changed that faster than anything else in the last 5 years, because customers have had to adapt, and being forced to adapt, they've realized they could do that safely and securely. And so we, mobile devices now, they're not necessarily in the office, but they need to have data wherever they are, because they do. So I think this notion of technology changing around us, manufacturers continuing to need to improve productivity and safety and quality. That's always going to be a challenge. So it's just it's fun. It's really a fun industry to be in, because there's always new. There's always new challenges, and there's always new technology, and there's always the ability to bring new solutions to customers. So I just I wouldn't have done it for 34 and a half years had I not really felt good about it. And I actually, to me, the last 5 or 6 years with this, whether you call it Industry 4.0 or whether you call it Industrial Internet of Things and the cloud and high-speed networking and edge computing, and it's really been one of the most exciting times in that 35-year period. Right, we started out PLCs in the late 70s, early 80s, HMI systems running on mini computers. You had MES systems, ERP systems. You kind of had a lull there while everybody focused on ERP. But now it's back to data collection, analytics, making better decisions, mobile, lots of great technology that can help people bring more productivity out of their assets.
So with this 30 years of experience, if you could take that and go back and visit younger Steve just starting out, what kind of advice would you give him?
Somewhere around kind of halfway through my career, I walked into the cubicle of a coworker, and he had a sign up that said, "Those who resist change seldom profit from it." And that has stuck with me. Not that I was resistant to change, but I actually take the opposite. I take that now to the sort of flip side, which is those who embrace change profit more from it. And so I think that's really it, is continue to be learning, continue to be looking outside of your current industry. We're starting to look at how does gaming technology play in the next sort of HMI realm, right? So there's all these parallel technology paths and parallel solution paths that we can look at. How do we bring that technology to bear to solve the problem of the industrial customer? And so that's really it's focused more about what's going on necessarily outside of the industrial space, and how can we leverage that in the industrial space to move faster.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Talking Industrial Automation. If you're interested in learning more about Steve Pavlosky or GE Digital, you can find them on the Industrial Automation Exchange at www.csiexchange.com. Thanks for listening, and thank you, Steve, for joining me today.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. I really enjoyed it, and I hope your audience got something out of it.
If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe in iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also help others find us by leaving a 5-star review and sharing your favorite episodes with colleagues. Thanks for listening to the Talking Industrial Automation podcast. Thanks also to bensound.com and Wistia for the music bumpers. Until next time.